We exist in a world of plenty, and in the world of pharmacovigilance, I sometimes wonder if that's actually a bit too much. We have so much, so many opportunities available to us, whether it is technology or data, information generally, information overload. So how are we going to make sense of what is available to us? And how is that going to shape the direction that we take over the next 5 years? So what I want to talk about today is this concept of trying to manage this explosion of information and opportunities that's coming our way. And I want to put it in the context um, of the phrase precision pharmacovigilance. And I'm using this very conceptually and using this as just a framework of thinking. But we do have the opportunity to be completely overwhelmed with information that's available to us. And so I think that the next 5 years is really stepping back a little bit and thinking about how do we make the most of what we have. So I think pharmacovigilance needs to be intentional, it needs to be thoughtful, it needs to be informed, it needs to be targeted, it needs to be focused. We need to be really thinking about what are we trying to achieve and how can we best achieve that, and how can we make best use of what's available to us. So I'm going to cover some areas that I think are all of which have come up already in the presentations this morning and this afternoon. So you're not going to hear anything different coming from the industry. But I will just talk a little bit about what we are struggling with, what we're grappling with, where we see opportunities and where we see potentially things moving in the next 5 years. So you'll see here these topics that I'm going to cover. But it's important that not only these topics an area of focus, but that needs to be supported by some approaches such as adaptability. We need in the industry, we need to be able to change constantly. We need to be learning new skills and new capabilities. 2012 saw the implementation of the new PV legislation. This has really required us to upskill our pharmacovigilance experts within the organization, and also to be building capabilities outside of pharmacovigilance where people understand and know more about pharmacovigilance and appreciate that pharmacovigilance is fundamental to success in drug development and bringing new medicines to patients, and fast. So we're heavily dependent on partnerships, both within and within our companies and externally. And we're reliant on innovation. So in precision pharmacovigilance, I don't mean that we take our eye off the ball. I don't mean that we are siloed in our thinking. We are always open to innovation, and so we are open to be curious. Technology, we've heard a lot today about technology. And I've got lots of acronyms on here because technology is always about acronyms. But this really is the way of the future. Digital health is a big ticket item. Everybody talks about digital health. Does it mean the same thing to everybody? And I would suggest no. E-pills, we keep talking about getting to the point where we can provide really pertinent information to patients in a way that they can use it. An electronic approach has to be the way to go, but we're still stuffing very complex and detailed pieces of paper into boxes and handing them out to patients. E-risk minimization, we're starting to see that opportunity to provide risk minimization tools to patients via some digital approaches. Technology in PV provides us with huge opportunities, not just around collection of data, but also around advances in analysis. Hopefully also reduce cost and efficiencies associated with removing the manual steps from our processes. We talk about machine learning, natural language processing, AI. The issue here is, can you imagine a world where adverse events are captured and processed without any human intervention at all. And is that the right way to go? But the possibilities are out there. We also need to be thinking about experimentation. Are there new things that we can be doing with technology? In my organization, we try some things. They don't always work, so we move on to the next one. But it's about it's about being curious. It's about moving with the times. Artificial intelligence, everybody talks about artificial intelligence. There are opportunities in pharmacovigilance. So a colleague of mine say, imagine the system that recommends the shirt that you want to buy on Amazon. That could be identifying the adverse event reports. Machine learning, it gets the attention of investors, and all companies are looking at, okay, where can this take us beyond what we have done traditionally in the past? Wearables. There's a lot of excitement about wearables. We've all probably got Fitbits. We've all got some piece of technology that's telling us how many steps we've taken today, or when we last jumped up and down and had some movement. Wearables, huge opportunity from a pharmacovigilance perspective. It scares me a little bit, because if we start collecting real-time data from patients, what is that data going to, are we potentially looking at a tsunami of adverse event information coming towards us? In the post-marketing space, there's no such things as recognizing disease-related events. So if we're capturing information via wearables, via apps on phones that could actually be construed as adverse events, how are we going to manage that information? How are we going to be able to tease that out from the true adverse event information? Reporting apps, we have seen through Web Radar, the apps that have been launched by 3 regulatory authorities in Europe. The interesting thing here was when they were developing these apps, it was determined that actually the users were not so much interested in reporting the adverse events, which is what they were designed to do, but actually into receiving information. So there's been a theme about people wanting to be better informed, better trained, better educated. So here's an opportunity. So the digital future for PV, I think, is moving from volume to value. We think about technology around processing adverse events, but actually I think there is a world out there that we have yet to tap into. Process and resource efficiency. Peter talked at the beginning of the day about how we have to focus on being efficient, using our resources appropriately. Same for the industry, absolutely same for the industry. But we need to think about doing this differently than we've done it before. So outsourcing, we look to outsource a lot of activities in pharmacovigilance now. More, it used to be it was just adverse event reporting. Now we're talking about other activities. And so rather than having a relationship with the vendor whereby we just throw the work at them and expect it to come back, now we are working with strategic partnerships with these vendors. So rather than pushing the work out to them, we're pulling the vendors into our pharmacovigilance system, being very, very intentional about it. More efficient processes, looking to refine our processes all the time, looking to reduce the number of SOPs so that people can actually understand what it is they're trying to do. Different ways of working, the new skill sets that I've talked about. Stronger internal partnerships. Pharmacovigilance now works routinely with clinical, with marketing, with our pricing folks, with HEOR. We're much more integrated into the processes within our organization. So we're no longer working in silos. We're all having to do more with less. So let's think about challenging the status quo. Are there different ways of doing it? Perhaps we can reduce the number of SOPs and still pass a PV inspection with flying colors. Increased cross-company collaboration. We have a situation now which drives me crazy. We all have a legal obligation to be auditing. We have to audit ourselves, we have to audit our partners. We're now in a position where we are auditing each other constantly. There has to be a more efficient way of us meeting those obligations. So not only are we auditing each other, we're also behaving like inspectors. So we're going in to do face-to-face audits with huge scopes. We have to be able to be more efficient. And then there's the concept of a global database. Imagine every drug company has its own database, and every regulatory authority has its own database. I've been in pharmacovigilance for over 20 years. And when I first joined, people were talking about the concept of having a single database that we could all be using. 20 years on, we still don't have that. And maybe that's cloud cuckoo land. But I think it should be possible for us to be sharing these kind of resources. So a suggestion here is that the industry could collaborate in a multi-hosted environment, reduces so much in the way of costs and burden on each individual company, but drives consistency and efficiency as well. And wouldn't it be great if we could persuade then the regulators to join us in that? Sources of safety information. This has been an explosion. So we've heard a lot today about real-world data. People in my organization talk about real-world data a lot, but I don't think that any two people understand the same thing or mean the same thing. This is where in pharmacovigilance, we need to be very intentional about what do we mean, what is going to be useful for us, what are we going to collect, and how are we going to assure that we access the right data. And is there a danger of having too much data? And is plenty of data, is more data always better than less data? We've got the situation with patient support programs. Currently, they generate a lot of safety information. We're doing some work at the moment in the industry to have a look at what does that information look like? Is it valuable? Is it meaningful? Is it good quality data? What's its impact on our ability to do signal detection? We've never really looked at this closely before, and we just keep collecting the data. So maybe there's some opportunities there. ICH 19 is looking at pragmatic approaches to collecting safety information in clinical trials. So why can't we apply that kind of thinking in the post-marketing space? The concept of Sentinel in the US, Sentinel is very well established. We've heard this morning about opportunities maybe in Europe to build something similar. Is that the way to go? Again, more opportunities for data, but let's be intentional about how we access that data and what do we think it's going to be able to provide for us. Epidemiologists, I think this is a function that we have certainly, my organization, grown our epidemiological function significantly. And these people are really adding value across the life cycle of products. With the access to more and more data, these people are becoming very fundamental. And they go across all of the various functions within a pharmaceutical company to help provide input and inform the activities that support the life cycle of the product. Patient insights, we've spent a lot of time today talking about patients and patients' insight. What does that mean? I was very struck by Patrick this morning talking about patient engagement and saying, what does that really mean? Because again, people talk about it a lot. People talk about patient preferences, patient experiences, patient centricity. Every company in this room, I'm sure, hears people say, we put the patient at the center of everything we do. But what does that really mean? And what does it mean in the context of pharmacovigilance? Yes, we should definitely be listening to patients. Yes, we should be involving patients, but we should be involving them in the right activities at the right time, at the right point in the development of a product to really inform the activities that we do so that the pharmacists that we were just talking about, they have what they need to be able to talk to patients for them to understand what their treatment is all about and how to take the drug safely. And I don't think we're there yet. I really don't think we're there yet. Benefit risk. Structured benefit risk assessment, that really was a requirement of the new legislation. And this is now well established across the industry. And I think we quickly realized that there was going to be no one size fits all. And now we're comfortable flexing through methodologies and techniques. We now have thoughtful risk management planning. So the RMP, the risk management plan, is not something that we do just before we're about to file for a marketing authorization application. It starts very, very early on, and it informs what we do throughout the whole clinical trial process and then beyond when the drug is on the market. We need to be prioritizing public health, and we've just listened to a plea for more education training. Again, as I say, 20 years in the industry. When I joined the industry, people talked about we need to get pharmacovigilance on the curriculum for doctors, for nurses, for pharmacists. We still have not achieved that. Maybe the next 5 years is the time that we'll get there. Risk minimization tools are getting more and more sophisticated. If we can use the technology, not only can we target getting the right information to the right patients, but maybe we can use that technology to measure the effectiveness. We can see how they're being used. We can have interactions with patients where they can share their experiences, and maybe that's a way of collecting some more robust data around the effectiveness of risk minimization tools. Because the studies to date are showing that they're not as effective as we would really like them to be. And public-private partnerships, let's have more of those. There's been some incredibly effective IMI projects, Protect, Web Radar, Prefer. These are really fundamental to moving the science forward and to really taking us to the next level, I think, in pharmacovigilance. Structured benefit risk assessment, I say, is now the new normal. A really good example of precision pharmacovigilance is the revision to Module 5 for the RMP, the GVP RMP module. Because what we have done now is we've been able to remove, we had shopping lists of identified risks and potential risks in the RMP. We've now, through the revision of Module 5, we've been able to focus that down to the really important risks that we can actually do something about or we need to find out more information about. And so remove the things that are well characterized and we're doing as much as we can already to mitigate those risks. So this is a very good example of precision pharmacovigilance. Also, I talked about the data coming from patient support programs. There's another area where Web Radar looked at social media. So think back 3 or 4 years, we all thought that social media was going to play a major role in identifying safety signals early. The work in Web Radar has indicated that actually at the moment, with the tools we have at the moment, we're not seeing that. But we are identifying areas where it might be useful, such as drugs of abuse. So precision pharmacovigilance, if you have a drug that you think that is being abused, maybe social media is a good place for you to be looking for additional information. And finally, harmonization of PV legislation. There has been an explosion of global pharmacovigilance legislation. For the industry, keeping up on top of all of the different needs is a real burden for us. So any opportunity for there to be harmonization is where we need to go. So ICH, obviously, it's existed a long time. We see new countries joining the ICH environment and driving forward. So that remains good. But it still means that we have to repeat the same thing country by country. So we spend a lot of time informing global regulatory authorities about, for example, signals coming from PRAC. We spend a lot of time telling countries outside of Europe, yes, PRAC have raised this signal. We will respond to you. We'll respond to you in the same timeline we respond to PRAC. So there's an awful lot of time wasted in informing people that we will inform them and keep them included. We also need to think there's a concept called right-size pharmacovigilance that's being talked about because in emerging markets particularly, maybe a robust ICH environment is not feasible or too big a step forward. So there's this concept of right-size pharmacovigilance, and it's been driven by WHO and Gates Foundation, who are thinking about how can we better support some of the countries where there is the desire to better serve patients and inform patients and give people access to information around safety, but they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the technology that we have in Europe. So we need to be doing things differently. We have a proliferation of national QPPVs. I'm the QPPV for my company. And it used to be that there was just one QP in any organization. And so it was quite easy to build governance around that one QP and enable me to get all the information I needed. We're now seeing countries outside of Europe adopting European type of legislation, and part of that being adopting this concept of a national QPPV. So we've now got multiple people that we need to keep informed and share information with them. And they're not all the same. So we spend a lot of time trying to ensure that everybody's meeting their legal obligations. So this is what the global landscape is looking like now for emerging markets. 3 years ago, most of us in the room would probably not have heard of most of these organizations, these regulatory authorities and trade associations. But this is moving apace, and we really, if we're going to be successful and our attention not diverted from focusing on making safe medicines for patients, we're going to be distracted by trying to fulfill all of these different requirements. And so I think it's time for us to really, really focus that globalization and harmonization efforts. So I'll end with the thought that pharmacovigilance, the concept of precision pharmacovigilance should really drive us to be successful in the future. And if we are going to make sense of the environment that we're working with the data, with the technology, with the global global ask on us, then we have to do things differently. We have to be more thoughtful. We have to be more intentional. We have to be smart, work smart at getting where we need to go. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vicky, for giving an industry review. Quite challenging given the number of different associations, so thank you for that. Any additional industry comments that may want to supplement or nuance any of the things that were presented by Vicky? We have got time for discussion. So we've been introduced, and I have to say I'd only recently heard the terminology precision pharmacovigilance, but I quite like it. Can I ask you...
Used broadly.
Used broadly. Okay. Can I just ask you a specific question? You talked about harmonisation of pharmacovigilance legislation and clearly and a proliferation of legal requirements in different countries around the world. And I'm aware that many of them are copying concepts that were in the 2012 legislation in the European Union. If Europe and the European regulators were going to engage in one or two things in terms of making the world a better place outside the European Union, I know I'm putting you on the spot now, what would in terms of harmonisation, outreach beyond Europe, what would those one or two things be?
I think it would be to help support the cause of the value of keeping things consistent. So my fear is that the more sophisticated some of these other countries become, so they accept, for example, they accept PSURs, they accept RMPs, but they will start to have local assessments, and then you start the divergence. And I worry this in the much closer to home when it comes to Brexit. So initially we may have harmonised documents, but what happens when regulators want a different risk, for example, added to the RMP, and then just having that, even that small difference in a planning document, I mean, we're used to managing label variations, but managing a variation in a risk where you've got a dynamic document that's a planning document that informs what you do going forward, and keeping track on all of that is very hard. So some way of reinforcing why it's in everybody's interest for things to be as harmonized as possible, because we just distract if